Well, now let me see where to start this here story. It is back in 1905, September near as I can recollect, when they started laying track for the Nevada Northern Railway up north of here in Cobre. It was a little town that kind of grew up out of the sagebrush to connect the Transcontinental Railroad with a line they was running down to Ely so they could haul all that copper that was being dug up and processed down in these here parts. The name was a good fit too, because Cobre is Spanish for copper. The depot where you're standing right now still remains just the way it was left more than 40 years ago, as a testament to a great American industry. You see, Ely's whole reason for being was on account of the mines. It all started back in the late 1870s, when prospectors discovered gold and silver deposits in this here part of the desert. Copper discoveries followed soon after, but back then nobody had much use for the low-grade deposits they were finding all over the place. Shoot, the ore was only about 3% copper. It just wasn't worth the cost of processing without moving whole mountains of ore. Well, right about the start of the 20th century, a pair of newfangled inventions, the electric light bulb and the telephone, were coming into use all across the country. And folks started to figure out that wiring up every home in America was about to create a mighty big demand for copper. Pert near hand in hand with that revelation, a railroad man over in Utah named Dan Jackling came up with the idea that by using steam shovel-loaded railroad cars in the mines, they could move enough low-grade ore to the smelter to make it profitable. And danged if that weren't what put little old Ely on the map. Well, sir, when a mining engineer over to Eureka named Mark Requa got wind of these new developments, he took up options on two of the biggest copper claims in the district. The biggest one was the Robinson mine up near the little town of Ruth. He set about making plans for a mill and a smelter, and it wasn't long before he merged his operations with other claims in the district. Altogether, the mines were producing around 100,000 tons of ore every month. He knew it'd be impossible to haul that much by horse and wagon. A railroad was the only logical answer to connect the mines to the smelter and then get the processed blister copper, which was about 98% pure, hauled up north to the main line at Cobre. But even pooling all their resources, Requa and his partners couldn't come up with enough money to make it happen. Then in '04, a New York bank hooked him up with the Guggenheim family. They'd already been exploring the district for a couple of years and were downright eager to strike a deal. Crews went to work laying track in September, but Requa didn't count on the worst winter in the past 20 years, and by January, everything was froze solid, and work had come to a screeching halt. During the hiatus, the Guggenheim started pulling some financial shenanigans, and by the time construction started moving toward Ely again in the spring, they'd wrangled the Nevada Northern Railway away from Requa and his partners. But Requa was determined to see his project through to the end, so he stayed on as vice president of the Nevada Northern. And when the last tracks were laid down Main Street in Ely, he drove home the final spike himself on September 29th. Oh, I remember they threw the biggest party Ely'd ever seen. Lasted 2 whole days. Even declared the 29th Railroad Day, so they could have another party every year after that. Passenger service from Ely to Cobre started just 2 days later. Freight service commenced 10 days after that. And just like that, Ely was linked to the outside world. Everything was run by the dispatcher from his perch on the second floor of the brand new depot, overlooking the sprawling rail yard just east of town. But work on the Nevada Northern wasn't done. The primary purpose of the whole shebang was hauling copper ore from the mines, and they were 8 miles further up into the mountains at Ruth. Well, the good folks of Ely were none too keen on having dusty old ore trains rattling right through their business district all day long. So the Guggenheims agreed to build a bypass north of town for the ore trains, and crews went to work laying more track up Robinson Canyon. An army of workers came from all over the world to settle in Ely and work the mines. In the beginning, they were working 3 pits, and as each one got deeper, they got wider. The operation got so dang big they had to relocate the entire town of Ruth in 1952 because it was sitting smack dab on the richest ore body of them all. Now, at the same time, work was progressing on a new mill and smelter up by William McGill's ranch in the Steptoe Valley, just north of Ely. And by April of 1908, they had everything up and running. The Nevada Northern completed a Highline branch from Ely to the brand new town of McGill on April 12th. And 1 month later, the first ore train rolled in to the cheers of a big crowd. And once again, where there'd been nothing but sagebrush a couple of years before, there was now a town of more than 1,000 people. Back in Ely, the railroad had been doing some expanding of its own. They added a fancy new brick engine house, a machine shop complex, a track scale, and standpipes for watering the engines. Now, Ely was the center of a full-scale copper mining operation, and White Pine County was a-booming. From 1908 to 1978, more than 4 billion pounds of copper and 2,700,000 troy ounces of gold came out of the Robinson mine alone. The Nevada Northern carried it all and quickly became the fastest, most efficient way to transport pretty much every other kind of freight as well. You see, up to that point in time, the only kind of transportation in these here parts was walking or riding a horse. But the railroad changed all that. It opened up this part of the country to the rest of the world, and the copper industry in eastern Nevada became a way of life for the workers and their families that would last for 3/4 of a century. In 1914, World War I brought on a big boost in the demand for copper, but that all came crashing down at the end of the war. All of a sudden, there was too much copper on the market, and in a matter of months, the mines were operating at half speed. Workers were being laid off left and right. Copper started to make a comeback 3 years later, but just when it seemed like things were starting to look up again, a fire broke out at the mill, and the whole building was a total loss. Well, sir, a lot of folks thought that was the end of the copper boom in White Pine County. But company president Dan Jackling wasn't ready to call it quits just yet. As soon as the cheering stopped, they went back to work, and less than 18 months after the fire, the rebuilt mill was back online, processing 9,500 tons of ore a day, double the capacity of the old mill. Well, things went along pretty smooth for several years after that. Then, in 1943, Nevada Consolidated got swallowed up into the Nevada Mines Division of the giant Kennecott Copper Corporation. By 1948, diesel-electric locomotives proved they could haul more ore for less money, and 2 years later, steam engines no longer operated in the pit. The automobile was making great strides as well. Just 8 years later, trucks had replaced trains altogether in the pit. And when another period of low copper prices came in the 70s, Kennecott called it quits on the railroad, putting an end to 70 years of ore train operations. Ore hauled in by truck kept the smelter running for a while, but by the time the 80s rolled around, rising costs, foreign competition, and stricter environmental regulations brought an end to all Kennecott operations in White Pine County. Then on June 21st, 1983, the last Nevada Northern freight train pulled into East Ely, ending 78 years of freight service. Demolition of the mill and smelter facilities started 5 years later, and in September of 1993, explosives brought down the 750-foot smokestack, closing the book once and for all on copper smelting in White Pine County. But that wasn't the end of the Nevada Northern. No siree. Thanks to a clause in their original contract, the railway was required to keep some of the equipment on hand just in case it might be needed in the future. Well, sir, as fate would have it, in 1995, another dramatic increase in the demand for copper made Ely a boom town once again, home to more than 4,000 people. So you see, without the Nevada Northern, the copper industry in White Pine County would never have been possible. As a result, it's been preserved as a heritage railway. And today, Locomotive 93 still hooks up her passenger cars and hauls people up Robinson Canyon to the mines. I thank you for taking the time to listen to the story of the Nevada Northern. I hope you enjoyed it. The interest of folks like you is what's kept it alive for the last 100 years. And if I have my say, we'll be around for 100 more. So I won't say goodbye. I'll just say so long for now.